Two guys in the dark.
To start this off, I grew up in the 1970s in a small town in North Carolina. Well, it was almost too small to be called a town, with only a school and a couple of small shops. I'm guessing you can imagine how boring it would be to be a teenager there. And it would have been if it wasn't for the woods. The neighborhood that I lived in backed up on a big forest that spread out for about 3 miles. And it's where I spent most of my teenage years with my two best friends, Levi Gibson and Connor LaChance. They both were in my class at school, and we were all 15. Levi lived across the street. He was smart and kind of quiet, unlike Connor, who lived down at the bad side of the neighborhood. Connor was a troublemaker, getting sent to the dean's office at least once a week. He was loud, obnoxious, and a natural leader, always finding something for us to do, be it legal or not, when he was around. We were never really bored. It was the beginning of the summer holidays, and Levi had called for me. We went down to go get Connor, who was messing around with his younger brother's scooter in the front yard, and we asked him if he wanted to go in the woods. He said, yeah, of course. In case this may be necessary, Connor had almost black, shaggy hair, and the most beautiful eyes. One was a light blue, while the other was a brownish color. He always wore scruffy red Converse shoes, and a denim jacket, and of course, I had the biggest crush on him. While Levi had styled brown hair, brown eyes, and freckles, he was considerably shorter than me. And then there was me, a red-headed, brown-eyed girl that quite a lot of people were scared of due to my hyperness. I was always ready to go somewhere or do something, and I was always talking about something. Anyways, we made our way into the woods and started walking into a random direction. We did this for fun, as it meant that we could usually get lost and have to find our way back, which most of the time just led to us being late for dinner and getting sent to our beds early, or worse, getting grounded. But we did it anyway. We were making our way along a deer trail that I didn't think that we had ever been on before, when Connor found a pile of shit, and of course dipped a stick into it and began chasing us with it. Levi and I, of course, freaked out and scattered. Neither of us wanted to be smeared with this. I ran off, and luckily for me, Connor followed Levi instead in the opposite direction. After a while of them not coming back, I began to think that they had left me, and I was furious. I was walking down the way that I had seen them run, when suddenly something stuck out of the bush and grabbed me. I let out a surprised yelp, and Connor shushed me, only for me to shout at him for scaring me. Only when I saw the look on his face, I decided that I shouldn't be talking, and I shut my mouth. Connor whispered to me, "You have to go see this," and began to lead me through the bushes. The further that we went, the more I could smell something disgusting. Finally, we came upon an almost green Levi, staring at the ground with a weird expression on his face. I was about to ask him what was wrong, but Connor tugged me past him a few feet away to where there was a ditch, and in that ditch was what I could only describe as something out of a nightmare. It was a body. It was a purple-blue color, and it almost looked swollen up. The stench was now terrible, and I had to cover my mouth with my jumper, so not to gag. I backed up to where Levi was. Connor stood, looking into the trench for about 5 more seconds before he walked back over to us. "Pretty cool, huh?" he said with a grin. Levi gave him a disgusted look before saying, "No, it ain't cool, dude. We need to go home and call the police." "What? Why? What do you mean?" "There is a body dumped into the woods, Connor. It's clearly been murdered." "No, man, it's so cool." "We can't go get the police. If we do, they're going to think that it was us who killed her." "Why would they think it was us?" "Because that's what the police do, man. Don't be stupid. Connor, you can't stop me." "Fuck's sake, man. If I get the police out here, it will be on the news. Everyone will get questioned. They will probably put out a curfew, and they will ban us from going into the forest. There will be police everywhere, and the summer will suck." I had just been quietly watching the argument take place, not really caring what happened. But that got to me, and there was no way in hell that I was going to let my summer get ruined. Connor's right. "What? You're not serious, are you?" "Levi, we have the whole summer left. Do you really want to spend it inside?" Yeah, man, 2 against 1. Come on. Don't do anything stupid. Levi looked crushed. Fine, but I'm not coming near this thing again. Connor had let out a whoop of joy, and we made our way home listening to him talk about how it would be our secret. Well, the secret didn't last very long, as by the end of the week, Connor had shown all the rest of our friends, and it's a miracle that nobody did call the police. But I guess that just shows how close everybody was. We were like a big family, and like most families, we had our secrets. The body remained there for the rest of the summer. I only went up a few more times, and it had gotten less interesting each time. According to Connor, there was only bones left. Anyway, on the last week of summer vacation, we decided to have a big camp out with all of our friends. There was me, Levi, Connor, Josh, Walsh, a very loudmouth boy with mousy brown hair and blue eyes, Alice Haley, a quiet girl with straight brown hair cut with a neat bob, Courtney Rhea, who I would describe as the only girl that I actually saw as a friend, probably because she was the only one who put up with my bratty attitude. She had long brown hair, almost black hair, and brown eyes, and also had freckles dotting her cheeks. Then there was Kenny Stokes, the kid whose garden we were camping in. He had sandy blonde hair, brown eyes, and freckles. His dad owned the biggest garden, so of course we had to camp there. And as an added bonus, Kenny's garden backed right into the woods. And even though he had promised Kenny's mom that we wouldn't go into the woods after dark, we were planning to anyways. But unfortunately, our plans were foiled by good old Mother Nature, as she had decided to make it rain. So all of us piled into the biggest tent, to which belonged to Courtney, and played cards for about 2 hours, making up new games with crazy rules. Josh even suggested that we play strip poker, only to have a shoe chucked at him, and to be told that if he carried on acting like a pedo, we would send him home. He quieted down after that, and we carried on playing until Kenny began complaining that we were going to run out of oxygen. This went on for about a good 10 minutes before he decided to unzip the tent and stick his head out so that he could breathe. "Hey guys, the rain stopped," said Kenny, excitedly. "Hey, seriously?" I said. "Yeah, let's go do something." We all argued for about a good 20 minutes about where we were going to go and what we were going to do. So far, breaking into our school and hanging out there was winning, until Connor had said, "Why don't we go see the body?" That was it. Everyone put on their shoes and coats. Kenny took out his dollar store flashlight that he had hung up from the roof of Courtney's tent, and off we went. Connor and Kenny led the way. But Kenny's flashlight, let's be honest, was pretty shit, and didn't light the way very well. And I don't believe that we needed it anyways. Because even though I hadn't been to the body in weeks, it was burned into my mind how to get there. The whole way there, we were talking about what it would look like now, and how creepy all of this was. Then the conversation took a turn that it never had before. We began talking about who we thought was the body, and why were they dead, who murdered them. And this scared me, because it made me see for what it really was, a dead body of a murdered person, hidden by somebody in the woods, and we had never reported it. I brought this issue up to Connor, who simply stated, "It's too late now. It's probably only bones left, and if we did tell the police, we would get in trouble for holding off for so long." To this I remained silent, and kept walking alongside Courtney and Levi, listening to Josh telling Alice some bullshit story behind us. They soon went silent, though, as we came to the ditch. Connor and Kenny stood silently at the edge, shining the flashlight into it, Kenny's mouth agape in horror. I asked what it was, and Connor shushed me, and then beckoned the rest of us over with his finger. As I came to the edge, I saw what they had freaked out about. In the ditch was something piled on top of the original body. It was wrapped in a yellow floral pattern bedsheet, and it was tied with some sort of string to stop the sheet from coming away. Everyone stood silent for what felt like hours, but in reality it was probably only a couple of seconds, before Connor pulled his Stanley knife out of his pocket and descended into the ditch. Levi began to protest, but Connor turned and shushed him, whispered for Kenny to shine his light on him, to which Kenny obeyed Connor, then cut some of the string and pulled up the sheet until it revealed the face of a young girl. She stared up at us with dead, glazed-over eyes and a blank expression. I felt like I was going to be sick, and apparently so did Levi as he began to violently reach out. He turned away. I couldn't turn away no matter how hard I tried. I was just mesmerized. Connor suddenly jumped back to look of a sudden realization, and horror crossed his pale face as he began to stumble up the side of the ditch. Josh helped him up. And of course, what happened? What is it? Whatever it was began to only have him frantically shushed us. And with a shaking voice he said, "It's a dry bone." A feeling of absolute dread settled into my stomach. And if you don't get what a big deal this was, it had rained only an hour earlier. Everything was wet, and this body was dry, which means that it had to have been put there recently. Everyone was silent. Then there was a noise behind us, across the ditch. My heart was in my throat as we turned around. Kenny quickly pointed his flashlight at where the noise was coming from. Then click. Suddenly from across the ditch came an extremely bright light illuminating us, and making the person holding the light impossible to see. "Run!" yelled Connor, grabbing me by the arm, and everyone just sprinted. And whoever it was with the light sprinted too, their light swinging violently as he ran, randomly illuminating trees and bushes and scaring the shit out of some deer. Then suddenly, it went off. I felt my heart stop, and Connor was muttering, "Shit, shit," or "fuck, where is he?" under his breath as we ran for our lives. I tried listening to hear if whoever it was behind us, but all I could see or hear was my pulse racing. Everything was beginning to go blurry as we crashed through the tree line and into Kenny's backyard, to be greeted by Kenny and Courtney. Levi stumbled, and a couple of seconds later, face streaked with tears of fear, followed by Josh. We huddled together, and everyone began blabbering about what the fuck was going on. Who was that? And what do we do if he finds us? But then Courtney spoke up. "Where's Alice?" Everyone went silent and looked towards the woods in fear until Levi spoke up. "Kenny, go get your dad." Connor looked over to glare at Levi before turning to Kenny and barking, "No, Kenny, don't get your dad. Let's think about this, okay?" "What the hell do you mean, think about this?" "He will call the police, and do you think the police are going to believe us?" "Yes." "No, they fucking won't. Look, we're going to wait for about 5 minutes, and then we can go get your dad." And for some reason, we waited 5 minutes. Soon it turned into 15, and then Connor reluctantly turned around to us and let out a defeated sigh. "Kenny, go get your dad, but you tell him that we were playing tag, and we ran into the woods so that we wouldn't get caught, okay?" "Right." Now Kenny's dad was a terrifying man. He was 6 foot and built like a tank. He was also an ex-Marine. So Kenny began pounding on his back door. And this goes on for about a minute before Mr. Stokes threw open the door, face red with fury. "What the fuck are you playing at, boy? It's 2 a.m. He hollered, "Dad, Alice is in the woods." "What?" "She ran in there when we were playing tag, and she hasn't come back out. We think that she's gotten lost, Mr. Stokes." He stared off into the woods for a bit, squinting, trying to see beyond the tree line before muttering an okay, and retreating into his house only to return 5 minutes later with a big flashlight. He stomped off into the woods. We all waited for about 20 minutes before he returned and said, "Fun's over, kids. Go home. Get your fathers and tell them to bring the flashlights." And that was it. We all went home and told our parents what was going on, and all the men went out into the woods to look for Alice, while the woman stood around in Kenny's backyard, while we were all told to stay at home. To which I didn't. I crossed the street and knocked on Levi's door. He answered, and I stepped aside. Apparently Connor had the same idea as he was sitting on the sofa in Levi's sitting room eating some chips. "Do you think that they will find her?" I asked quietly. "Yeah, she's probably just panicked and got herself lost," Connor said. "And what if he got her? What if she's dead? What are you going to do then?" Levi then stood by the window, looking into the dark street. "Then we keep to our stories. The same thing that we told everybody. She ran off into the woods and didn't come out. That's all you say." Suddenly the sound of the police sirens cut through the air. "Oh no," mumbled Levi, as the police drove down the street to Kenny's house. We watched as 2 police cars pulled up, and the man got out carrying big flashlights. They walked around the back and into the woods. After that, me and Kenny went home, and I watched out my window as suddenly 5 more police cars appeared. My parents came home at around 6 o'clock that night. I asked my mother what happened, and she told me that they found a body in the woods, and that it wasn't looking good. The next day, the police interviewed all of us, and we stuck to Connor's story. They didn't find Alice. And just like he said, it would be there on the news coverage, a ban on us going into the woods. And there was a curfew for 9 p.m. When we went back to school, there was assembly on safety with strangers. They found Alice in the end, 12 days later, chopped up into little pieces, and crammed into a garbage can on the side of the road 10 miles from her house. I have my own kids now, and have since lost contact with all of my childhood friends, apart from Levi, whom I now have a child to, and he recently told me that Kenny had been killed due to an overdose. We were invited to the funeral along with the rest of the kids that I grew up with. I will not be attending that funeral at all. It started as a normal camping trip for me. I was 13 at the time, and I was the loner of my life, and enjoyed being alone, going on little trips in the woods, and doing some reading and other little things. I did like to leave in the middle of the night and hid among the trees thinking that I was a ninja or something like that. But I went out to play in the trees, and I did have to come back because it was dark. When everyone was asleep, I snuck out to go see the creek in the moonlight. So I was walking there, being that I was supposed to be asleep, and I wasn't very bright. Realized that I had no idea where I was, so I stopped. I heard some crunching behind me. I looked and saw a mountain lion inching a good 30 feet to my left side. I stumbled, and strip spurting, I noticed that it heard me. I stared at it, and then I screamed. I jumped up and ran, not knowing if it's following me. I ran to a small graveyard and fell over a tomb to feel an ice-cold hand grab me rough by the wrist, which was true horror, and then I was yanked to my feet. I was pulled, and the mountain lion jumped out of the trees and headed for me. Still being pulled, I was yanked all the way back to camp. I fell about 15 feet away from where the fire was, and when I heard my rescuer yell, "You stupid-ass motherfucker," I look up. "I love you too, Beth." I had just realized that it was my older sister. She had been trailing me like she does when I left, and had noticed someone in the graveyard. Not the animals, but a large man figure in a hood walking my way fast, and jumped in, so if it were not for my sister, I would not be alive, even if she doesn't know how much she has saved me and what she saved me from. Then she looked me in the eyes and said not a word about this to Mom. I shook my head. I knew that she would never tell anyone of our trip into the woods, that horrible camping trip. When I was about 14 or 15, my dad and I went camping with one of my friends at a local park 5 miles from where we lived. The campgrounds is located in the biggest state park in our area, with miles of trails, many of which are for horseback riding or mountain biking, in addition to being able to walk these trails. The day after we initially set up camp, we decided to hike some of the trails after breakfast. After walking for about 20 minutes, we come to this group of trees with people standing on the ground and hanging out in the trees. The odd part is they were all wearing medieval clothing. They all had some sort of weapon. They were asking if we were part of some clan, and if we weren't, then we couldn't pass. We tried to explain that we were just campers walking along that particular trail, but I don't think they got it because they asked us the same question once again. One of the people started to come towards us. That's when we started running in the other direction. At the time, we weren't sure who those people were and what they were supposed to be doing out in the middle of the woods. And now that I think about it, they're probably a group of people LARPing. But at the time, I, nor my dad and his friend, knew exactly what LARPing was and didn't know it was a thing. I laugh about it now. A little background story. I'm Tessa. I'm 14 years old. I live in Minnesota, and I go to this one campground up north in kind of the middle of nowhere. I've gone to that campground for about 11 years now, and still go out there to this day. It's been only open for about a year or two before I started going there. My mom is really popular there. We happen to know everybody. They always are having parties or staying up till 1 o'clock, drunk as hell. This particular night haunts me forever. Me and my friend Chloe were best friends. She was a shy brunette, and I was the wild blonde. She always had this thing where she never liked sleepovers. This one night, me and her planned on having a sleepover in a tent outside her actual camper. Our parents did not stay out late that night for some reason. We had a fire and did regular camping stuff. It was around 1 when we decided to go in this shower house with showers and bathrooms. It was one of the best campgrounds in North America. It's a fact, not my opinion actually. So we were in the shower house, planning to just hang out because the shower house and the lodge is the only place that has Wi-Fi. My data does not work because it is in the middle of nowhere. So we plan on staying there until around 3 a.m. We are at about 2 a.m. and we need chargers. We go to her camper, grab the chargers, and on our way back, we're outside the door for some air before we go inside. Chloe is on her phone, and around the corner behind her is an old guy, or maybe some kind of woman. Looks to be about 100 years old, and is a walking rat. Looks like one at least. I scream and tell her what I see. The guy has a crazy smile on him. We run as fast as our little legs let us, about 2 steps until we get inside. I start crying because I'm so scared. She's freaking out because she does not know what was just behind her back. We plug in our chargers and hesitate to call either of our parents. We feel like they would get really mad at us and not even believe us. Besides, we were out until 3 a.m. We were not even supposed to be out past 1 on that night, so now we're freaking the fuck out and ready to just bust out the door. We've been in there for about an hour at this point, past the time that we saw the old creepy man. We hesitate to open up the door, but end up opening up the door anyways. I'm thinking that we're going to die. We run out the door, and as I turn around, I see the old creepy man with something that looks like a knife in his right hand, right around the corner from where I think we're about to get stabbed. To this day, we almost remember this night. P.S. Our parents did believe us, and they were mad at us for not calling them. I definitely learned my lesson that night, and if anything like that ever were to happen again, I would definitely call my parents up immediately. It all started when summer came, and me and my 3 friends, Lola, Katie, and Jennifer, were all planning to go camping. We were all excited and scared at the same time, because we were going camping alone. Lola asked her dad if he could drop us off. He agreed to go take us. When the next day came, we started heading up. Lola's dad set up the camper that we were using. There's some spare blankets inside, in case you get cold, he said, before leaving us. Lola's dad finally got into his truck and turned around. He stopped and rolled down his window and said, "No boys," to all of us, smiled at us to let us know that he was joking with us, and then drove off. There were 3 rooms in the trailer, 1 master bedroom, 2 rooms with bunks. Each room had a TV in it, so no one cared what room that they got. Everyone knew that Jennifer didn't like small rooms, so we let her have the big one. I was in a room with Lola, and Katie was in a room by herself. I started unpacking when we heard a loud boom outside. "Lola, did you hear that?" "Hear what?" "The boom." "Yeah." We both looked at each other, startled, then continued unpacking. But something seemed off. It was the fact that Lola was so chill about it. I was done unpacking, so I walked outside and started a fire. Jennifer walked out and asked if I saw it. I asked, "Saw what?" Then she started freaking me out. She was staring right behind me, unpacking. Her eyes darted back and forth. Then she calmed down. I felt as if something was watching me, so I turned around. I saw an orb in the corner of my eye, reddish black. By the time that I turned to look, it was gone. I was so freaked out that I told Katie she could cook. Instead, we had our family's secret recipe of shepherd's pie and a bunch of vanilla cupcakes. There were about a dozen cupcakes left in the open box, so we just left it on the counter and went to bed. I could hear the TV coming from Katie's room, so I punched the wall and told her to be quiet. Right after I said it, Everything went quiet, except for a small scream in the distance. It didn't sound human. It gave me chills that ran down my spine. I dozed off, but woke in the middle of the night from hearing someone in the kitchen. I woke up Lola, and then we walked out into the small hallway that led into the kitchen. I saw Jennifer sitting on the table, staring straight ahead. Something had touched me. I jumped and realized that it was just Katie seeing what was making that weird sound. Jennifer was really creeping me out. She never stared into space this often, but then I noticed something in the corner of my eye. It was a shadowy figure. It was staring at Jennifer and slowly turned to face me and Katie. I froze. Katie froze. Jennifer then looked at us, as if being controlled. Then the figure ran out of the window. Jennifer then dropped her head onto the table. We tried to wake her up, but ended up falling asleep. This experience still scares me to this day, and is only one of the creepiest things that I have seen. Me and the others are still very close friends. We live together now. But we all remember that night, and whatever it was we saw. It turns out Jennifer remembers seeing it in the daytime, but was out cold when the rest of us saw it. It freaks us out even more now knowing that our friend wasn't even awake and staring into space, eyes wide open. I used to live in Japan, but recently moved to a town somewhere in America. At our town, there was a story going around that a cult had a cabin somewhere near the woods, and they were doing incantations, summoning spirits and specters, the usual paranormal stuff. Me and my friend Jack, whom I had met when I first came to town, didn't really believe in the paranormal, so when we had an opportunity to do so, we would every so often camp near the section of where the camp was rumored to be and search around for it. It didn't take long, since on our 5th time we found where it was. The cabin was completely hideous. It was infested with cockroaches, spiders, and even some centipedes. The left side of the cabin was decayed slightly. The right side had a bit of a termite problem. At first it looked like an old run-down cabin. Then we took a second, much closer look. That was when a horrid stench hit us. It was horrible. I gagged, and I almost vomited. We opened the door slowly. That was when I couldn't take it anymore. I vomited into the grass just to the left of the cabin. The reason that I vomited was even worse than when the stench was outside. Just at the front door was a dead dog. It had been butchered and left to rot. Worst, it was a local dog that had went missing just 2 days before we found the cabin. Jack gently pushed the dog to the side so that we could get inside. He waited a bit for me and kept going. Inside was like the exterior. Only exception was blood-red ruins replacing the bodies. We came into the main living room of the cabin. It had a big ritual circle. The walls were different too, this time now sporting words such as devil, the beast, our master, the end, and much more terrifying words, such as the runes and eyes. It was blood red. Except this time it seemed like this was real blood. That was when I figured out that the other drawings were simply dried and didn't look as clear as these. The more I figured out, the worse I felt. If the others were dried, wouldn't that mean that these were just made? That was when I had it. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned to the cabin doors, and what I saw I can never unsee. A tall, slender figure covered in intestines, blood, and organs. Everything that was gross and putrid. It was blocking the cabin door. That was when I screamed as loud as I could. I turned back to look at Jack. Though he still looked like Jack, the man that I was looking at was carrying a knife. He had a grin on his face, widened by the second. I backed away from him, but he grabbed my arm and dragged me closer. I struggled, trying to get away, but his grip was locked firmly. I watched in horror as the knife was raised. That was when I made a last-ditch effort. I kicked him in the forbidden zone, which worked, and I ran towards the direction of the door. That was when I bumped into the slender figure once again. Now I could make out its face. What I saw was not human. It looked like the face of something out of the deep depths of hell itself. I shambled back a little bit, then remembering Jack was there, I moved to the right. I found a window, the only window in the entire cabin. I tried and tried to open it, but it simply didn't budge. I turned back in shock as I realized that this was how I was going to die. I was going to be murdered in some satanic cabin by my friend. I crouched down, now in tears, and closed my eyes. I waited for the knife to end it all. I waited, but eventually nothing happened. So I slowly opened up my eyes and saw that it was daytime. Jack, or what I believe was possessed Jack, had collapsed on the floor, still clenching the knife. The slender figure was gone. I tried at the window again, and now that it was daytime, I saw that it was locked. I unlocked it and opened it up. How silly, I thought, that I didn't check for the locks. I made a mental note to always do that, and then proceed to exit via the window, carrying Jack through it first. I ran to our campsite, put Jack in his tent, and went into mine. I recapped on what happened, and then put this in my diary. Though this wasn't the nearest near-death experience that I have ever had, it was definitely the most extreme and grotesque. I waited for Jack to wake up, and then headed back to town with him. I never told anyone what had happened, and definitely didn't tell Jack, who is now my best friend of all time, that he almost had killed me. I was at camp, and I hate camping, but as a leader, I had to do it. I brought my laptop to entertain me when I got out there. I set up a main tent when one of my friends named Anthony, who is one of the leaders, came up. We were joking when a green blur ran across the field that made up our campsite. We both waited until every scout was there. We said the rules. They began cooking with food. Now this was survival camp, and the scouts collected firewood. I light the fire, and we start cooking rabbit when one of the campers screamed 2 bright eyes were staring out of the trees. Then I did something that I regret. I yelled, "Good joke, now get the hell out of there." My friend said to calm down, aimed his flashlight at the tree. We saw the blur once again, after about 1 more hour. It was time to go to sleep. So we showed the scouts to their tents, and then we moved to our own. I opened up my laptop to get some work done when I heard a scream. I ran outside, looked around. I saw a group of scouts running towards me. I looked around, saw the bright eyes staring near their tent. I took the scouts into the main tent and asked them what they saw. Then one of them said, "We're not quite sure." I asked for details, and then they told me what the color of it was. I woke up Anthony. We both walked outside. We had grabbed kitchen knives, and then we walked up, and then saw the green shape. "What the fuck are you playing at?" Anthony yelled. It turned around. It was a large shape. It gave an inhuman screech before running off into the woods. The next day we told the campers to pack up their stuff and move out. When we were moving, I happened to have seen the blur on the edge of the woods. I questioned everyone, asking them if they knew what the hell that thing was. No one knew. To understand why my mother and I were out at Whitlock Lake, I have to give you a little background on us. My mother and I run a wreath business in a quiet northern Michigan town. Violent crimes are virtually non-existent. It was fall. Around this time of year, the forests in Michigan become rich with color. This day was full of warmth and color. Instead of buying pine cones for decorating wreaths, we decided to go foraging for them in our local woods. I knew about Whitlock Lake from high school days. Some of my friends and I went out there a couple of times to party. It's a small camping area with about 3 sites. This lake is connected to another bigger lake a few miles down the road. It is in a small, old logging town called Jennings. Pop 20, maybe a little more or less. The times that I went out there as a high school student, it never had a strange feeling in the air. The day my mother and I went to go forage, the air was thick with fear, and we felt like we were being watched. We thought maybe it was just a small woodland creature hiding and watching, waiting for us to just leave, so we continued. About an hour goes by, and we decided to move on. We moved to where the forest meets the water. There are cute, tiny little baby pine cones that we use for our tabletop wreaths. Shortly after we found ourselves at the edge of the lake, we heard a few gunshots from across the lake. We live in northern Michigan. People are getting ready for hunting season around this time of year, so we just shrugged it off. We got into our car and moved down the trail. When we got out of my car, I noticed quite a few gunshot shells on the ground. Again, it's not common to find shells of any sort on the ground this time of year. We continued. We were at the end of the trail with the last 2 campsites on either side of the trail. We continued foraging for about 20 more minutes. As we walked across the trail to the next site, we noticed something was very strange. At the opening of the campsite, we noticed a tall 5 or 6 foot wooden pole. At the top of that pole, we saw 2 leather straps wafting in the wind. To us, that was strange. Why would someone want leather straps on a pole? Of course, we put it out of our minds and continued. A short while later, we stumbled upon an old beat-up mattress that looked like it had been there for a while now. As we got closer to the mattress, the ground around it was very mucky. As soon as you stepped somewhere, you sunk into about half a foot down. People dump garbage in the woods a lot up here. When we started walking past it to get to the pine cones on the other side, this horrible smell seeped into our nostrils. We both looked at each other at the same time. Got the hell out of there. By now we're scared out of our wits. As we were driving out of the trail ahead, we were met by a guy in a red Cadillac-type vehicle. The look on his face scared the bejesus out of us. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it was all in our heads. I would like to think that my mother and I have a good sense of that sort of thing, and we get out of there just in the nick of time. Needless to say, my mother and I have never been back to the lake, and I don't plan on going back. About a week later, I couldn't hold this event inside myself anymore, so I called the cops and recalled the incident as best as I could. They said that they would look into it. I haven't heard anything since. This happening still haunts me to this day. I'm always thinking about what may have actually happened out there.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.